designated to take overspill from the great cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh, the major programmes of slum clearance in Glasgow and Edinburgh in the years immediately after the war. So they developed these, what they called new towns, on the outskirts of the cities, and they built homes for the displaced population, and they also built industrial estates and factories so that the people would have jobs to go to when they were moved there. And there were several of these built around, I think 5 in total. 3 around Glasgow, which is East Kilbride, Cumbernauld, and this one of Irvine, and a couple around Edinburgh as well. And very often what you're doing is there's an existing town or village there which then was completely transformed as the new town was developed around it. The curious thing is that we still refer to these as new towns despite the fact that they were sort of all built back in the 1950s. I guess new is a sort of relative concept in Scotland. After all, we still refer to the new town of Edinburgh, and that was built, they started to build that in 1767. We're really skirting Irvine at the moment.
Castle Edinburgh is open with the Queen's passing? Is Edinburgh Castle open with the Queen's passing?
I've just been asked if Edinburgh Castle is open. No, it has been closed since Her Majesty passed away. Apart from anything else, they've been firing all sorts of gun salutes and everything from the castle ramparts. I'm not actually quite clear when it will be reopening. I have a feeling it might not be until after Her Majesty's funeral next week. So I think it may be closed until then, but I'm not entirely sure. But it certainly has been closed since last Friday.
And that's the same with Holyrood too, isn't it?
Well, I believe so, which I need to check up on because I'm actually meant to be taking a tour that includes Holyrood Palace on Thursday this week, and I really need to find out before we go there if it's open or not. My own suspicion is that it will not be. I think that probably royal palaces are closed until after the end of the period of official mourning, which won't be until after the Queen's funeral, which is a week today.
18th,
But
19th.
I could be wrong in that. I am speculating, I'm afraid. I have to say this is thankfully not something we have to contend with every week of the year. So we're heading down actually now, roughly in the direction of the town of Troon. Again, we'll be bypassing that, but Troon, another very popular seaside resort here on the Clyde coast, with a great promenade and beach. Very popular again for day trips from Glasgow or whatever. And also one of the places very namely again for golf, Royal Troon, one of the great golf courses of Scotland. And there you see the sign for the turn off for Troon. So looking across the bay there on the right, the town of Ayr really sitting at the centre of the bay, and then the headland out to the right you're looking at, that's going out to an area called the Heads of Ayr, which we'll be heading by later on as we continue to make our way south. And over to the right, we are going to still stay on the main road here, but at this roundabout, over to the right, the road that takes you down to Prestwick Airport. Now, that airport is not a particularly busy one these days. Back in the past, it used to be that all international flights from the west of Scotland, from Glasgow basically, went from Prestwick, and the Glasgow airport was really reserved for domestic and European flights. So certainly any transatlantic flights used to go from Prestwick, but they changed that, oh gosh, many years ago. So Glasgow is now really the main airport for Glasgow, the west of Scotland. Prestwick is now used, there's quite a few, I think, charter flights and whatnot go from Prestwick, and also quite a lot of cargo flights, but it's not particularly Glasgow, which is one of the two busiest airports in Scotland, the other obviously being Edinburgh. But Prestwick is still sometimes used when there is heavy fog line, because Prestwick, because of its coastal location, is generally fog free. So flights are sometimes diverted to Prestwick if Glasgow Airport is fog bound. So this road, we're on the A77, this is effectively going to bypass the centre of Ayr, but we will be coming into Ayr later on this afternoon after we've visited Culzean, so you will have a bit of free time to wander around Ayr subsequently, but at this stage we're going to bypass the main town. And then once we're sort of almost past the centre of Ayr, we're going to head right and head down towards the village of Alloway, which is really now just an affluent suburb to the south of Ayr. And that is a place that has particular associations because it was the birthplace of Scotland's national bard, Robert Burns, of whom I'm sure you've heard. And this whole part of Ayrshire, this is the Kyle that we're in now, very much associated with the poet Burns. And we'll actually be driving by and across the scene of his perhaps his best known poem. I don't know if you've heard of a poem called Tam O'Shanter, but that is a rollicking, hilarious account of the adventures of one of the local farmers who one market night has a little too much to drink, and on his way home from the pub on his horse he stumbles across a witches' party taking place in the old ruined church at Alloway. He gets carried away as he watches the shenanigans going on there. He shouts out, "Well done, Cutty Sark," and suddenly all the witches and warlocks burst out of the church and start chasing him on his grey mare Meg. But of course, witches have a serious problem when they're trying to catch you, which is that they are unable to cross a stream of running water. So Tam and Meg had to make it to the old Brig of Dune, which over the River Dune at Alloway, and if they were able to reach the keystone of that, then they would be safe because the witches couldn't cross the stream. So they just managed to get away and no more. And that is a very, very brief summary of what is actually a wonderful poem. It's got some wonderful lines in it, some of which I think you may have heard in other contexts, but yes. As we're passing by Ayr, I'll mention what the poem says about the town of Ayr. It says, "All there, wham there a tune surpasses, for honest men and the bonny lasses." So there you are. But or there's the bit where it's described when Tam's out carousing with his friends, particularly his closest bosom friend, Suitor Johnny, in the inn in Ayr. His wife is left at home, and we think now on the lang Scots miles, the mosses, waters, slaps and stiles that lie between us and our hame, where sits our sullen, sulky dame, gathering her brows like gathering storm, nursing her wrath to keep it warm. This truth found honest Tam O'Shanter, as he frae Ayr a nicht did canter. All there, one ne'er a tune surpasses, our honest men and bonny lasses. Ah, Tam, hadst thou but been sae wise as ta'en thy ain wife Kate's advice, she told thee weel there was a skellum, a bletherin', blusterin', drunken blellum, that frae November till October, market day, thou wasna sober. And so it goes on. But,
Very good.
and then there's the bit where Tam is having a high old time in the pub with his pals, but he has to leave to go ride home in the middle of a terrific storm. And Burns writes, but pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Or like the borealis race that flit ere you can point their place, or like the rainbow's lovely form, evanishing amid the storm. Nae man can tether time nor tide, the hour approaches Tam maun ride. That hour a next black art's the key stain, that dreary hour he tacks his beast in, and sick a nicht he tacks the road in, as ne'er poor sinner was abroad in. It sets the rather ominous theme for what happens next. So, Ayr Town Centre down there to our right, and also down there, incidentally, is Ayr Racecourse. It's one of the major horse racing venues in Scotland, the scene each year of the Scottish Grand National, among other things. But once again, we are skirting inland around the edge of the town. And you see these lovely lush green fields over to the left. It's generally fair to say that the west of Scotland, where we are just now, tends to be damper but milder than the east of Scotland, which is a bit drier but also cooler. And the result is, this is by no means a universal rule, and there are plenty of exceptions to prove it, but on the whole it means that here in the west of Scotland you tend to get less in the way of arable farming of crops, and more in the way of livestock farming. Particularly, I believe, in Ayrshire, a lot of dairy farming in Ayrshire, whereas the east of Scotland you tend to get more in the way of arable farming. Now, as I say, there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, but that's, I think, a broadly accurate distinction to draw.
Is Ayr where we eat lunch at?
Just been asked where you're eating lunch. No, you'll have your lunch well, unless you want a very late lunch, I would suggest you probably want to take your lunch while you're in Culzean. There's a very good cafeteria there. Obviously, lunch is not included in the tour today, so you'll have to buy your own. But there's a very good cafeteria restaurant at Culzean. Or if you want to wait a bit later and have a later lunch, you're going to have some free time in Ayr later on, so you could get a bite to eat there. But that's entirely up to you what you want to do. But we'll make that clear as we're approaching the respective places. So this road we're on, the A77, is actually quite an important trunk road, because at the end of this road is the town of Dunure, near that the port of Ryan, and that's the main ferry port for traffic going across to Northern Ireland, to Belfast. So you get very often you get a lot of lorries heading up and down this road, heading to or from Northern Ireland.
What's a lorry?
What's a lorry?
Yes.
A truck. So we'll be cutting down to the right soon in towards Alloway. This will take us past the Burns Birthplace Museum, I shall point out, and will also take us past the old haunted kirk of Alloway, where much of the action in Tam O'Shanter takes place. And also we'll get a good look at the old Brig of Dune, which is the bridge that Tam had to get over to escape the witches. So point that out as we head down there. So as I was saying earlier, the witches' revel is going on inside the old haunted kirk at Alloway. And Tam is riveted by all the action, particularly by one rather attractive young lady witch who's dancing around in a sark that is described as scanty, and Rab loses his control, and Blair Tam tint his reason altogether, it says, and roars out, "Wheel done, cutty sark!" And in an instant all was dark, and scarcely had he Maggie rallied, when out the hellish legion sallied. As bees buzz out wi' angry fight when murdering herds assail their dyke. And so on, Tam and Maggie pelt hell for leather for the old bridge to try and get over it. The Burns Birthplace Museum, the Burns Birthplace Museum is just here on the left. And as we come down to the bottom of this road and swing left, right in front of us on our right as we turn the corner, that is actually the old haunted kirk of Alloway, which was a ruin even in Burns's day. And Burns's father actually is buried in the kirkyard in the old kirk there. And that's the old Alloway kirk on the right, where the action at Tam O'Shanter took place. It's a rather more modern replacement on the left. Very attractive hotel down here, the Brig of Dune Hotel. And as we continue, we're going to cross over the River Dune. Look to your left as we cross over, and you're looking at the old brig that Tam and Maggie had to flee across. So that's the old Brig of Dune on the left there. And now do thy speedy utmost, Meg, and mak the keystone of the brig. There at them now thy tail may toss, a running stream they dawn across. But ere the keystone she could make, the fiend to tail she had to shake, for Nanny, far before the rest, hard upon noble Maggie pressed. And there at Tam with furious fettle, but little wist she Maggie's mettle. A spring brocht off her measter heel, but left behind her ain grey tail, the carlin clocht her with a rump, and left poor Maggie scarce a stump. Now wha this tale of truth shall read, ilk man and mither's son, tak heed. Whene'er to drink ye are inclined, or cutty sarks run in your mind, think ye may buy the joys o'er dear. Remember Tam O'Shanter's mare. So, ladies and gentlemen, having passed the scene of Tam O'Shanter's action, as you can see, much of Alloway is now really some rather desirable housing. This is really rather sort of an upmarket suburb of Ayr now. But we are heading back down towards the coast road, and we'll be following that coast road all the way down, pretty well all the way down towards Culzean. And we'll have a little detour on the way to visit the ruins of another old castle associated with the Kennedy family, Dunure Castle. So it may be time to just give you a little bit of background at this stage towards the Kennedys of Dunure, Castles and Culzean. The lands in this part of Carrick were given to the Kennedy family back in the middle of the 14th century, probably around the year 1350, and subsequently the chiefs of the family became Lord Cassilis and then the Earl of Cassilis, and initially their main stronghold was in the castle of Dunure, the ruined castle that we'll have a look at in a wee while. But that wasn't, that basically just wasn't grand enough for them, as they felt they were rising their way up through the ranks of the nobility. And Culzean Castle, which had also been a Kennedy possession, though a different branch of the family originally, was selected in the 18th century for really development into the grand and quite spectacular mansion house that we see today. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we're getting nearer, but Dunure was the original stronghold of the Earls of Cassilis, and there is a particularly gruesome story associated with that. By the way, we're now entering Carrick. We're leaving Kyle and entering Carrick. And there is a very gruesome story associated with Dunure Castle and the wicked 4th Earl of Cassilis. And this is dating back to around the year 1570. One of the things that we will pass by later on today, after we visited Culzean, as we're heading back north, is we'll pass by the very impressive ruins of Regal Abbey, which was a major monastery just to the south of the town of Mayhole. After the Protestant Reformation in Scotland in 1560, the lands of Regal Abbey were handed over to what was called a lay commendator. There was a man called James Stewart was awarded the lands, but the wicked 4th Earl of Cassilis, Gilbert Kennedy, the Earl of Cassilis, felt that he should have been awarded the lands of Regal rather than Stewart. So what he did was he kidnapped the commendator of Regal and took him to his villain's lair at Dunure Castle and took him down to the dungeon there. And by the way, this headland you see to the right is called the Heads of Ayr. There's a little sort of holiday park here on the right. So he took him down into the dungeons of the Dunure castle and proceeded to torture him. And the particular way he was tortured was he was basted in oil and then roasted on a gridiron over a fire. And after a little bit of this, perhaps not surprisingly, Stuart agreed to sign the lands over to the Earl of Castles. As far as we know, the Earl of Castles was never called to account for his behaviour, but he did agree to compensate Stuart with a large sum of money in exchange for the lands that he'd signed over to him. And it's said that Stuart was never able to walk again after his experience of being roasted alive in the dungeons of Dunure Castle. So you can see that the Kennedys of Castles were not necessarily people that you wanted to cross. A wonderful view here across over to the island of Arran there on the other side of the water. Now, as you can see, the main road that we're on at the moment is running up at the top of the ridge overlooking the water to our right. But we will be, to get down to Dunure Castle, we will have to head right down into the down to the shoreline. So we have a rather narrow and windy route down there. This is where William earns his pay for the day, and we'll pull up there, and an opportunity for you, if you wish, to pop out and take some photographs of the what is now the ruined Dunure Castle. It has been a ruin since the 17th century. By that time, the Kennedys were no longer living in Dunure. But over to our right there, that is Arran. And then straight ahead of us at the moment, as we swing round this curve to our left, looking to your right, you'll see that curious, almost symmetrical plug of Ailsa Craig just over there on our right on the horizon. As I say, Ailsa Craig is uninhabited. There is a lighthouse in Ailsa Craig, which used to be a manned lighthouse, but all Scottish lighthouses have been automated for the last 30 years or more, so it's not, there's no one who lives in the lighthouse now, but it is still a source of curling stones. As I said, occasionally people go over and help themselves with some more of the granite. So we're about to head off down towards Dunure. This little village here is called Fisherton. And it's a pretty, it's not really a road that's been designed for coaches, particularly with people parking on both sides of the road at the same time. That is not good going. Tell me, do you have bad drivers in America? Is it just over here?
More than our share. Yeah, he's gonna run over his boots.
Run over his boots, yeah. Purple arm.
Okay.
Ran over his boots. Oh no, my boots.
This ain't gonna help us. William, you're a genius.
Yeah, except the guy's still. Oh, there it goes.
He's on his phone, he's just.
Guinness kills.
Well, that was interesting.
I don't think he's going to steal that. He's still got. That's sexy.
once again, these houses have those wonderful views, don't they? They've all got these big picture windows. Ah, bonny Scotland.
That's that domed rock ahead of us.
What?
The domed rock in front of us.
That's Ailsa Craig, which I was just telling you about. And in fact, the Earls of Castle, since the beginning of the 19th century, they got bumped up in the peerage. They're now the Marquesses of Ailsa. And although they no longer own Culzean Castle, the Ailsa estates still own a great deal of the land in this part of Ayrshire. So this is Dunure we're just coming into, and the castle will be a bit further on our right, and there it is coming into view now, and just wherever you can find to pull up, William, and we'll give you a chance to have a quick photo stop here. It's now 10:15, and just give you no more than 10 minutes or so here, I would think. 10 minutes or so, hopefully, and then we can
That mark up here.
So it's quite a formidable looking ruin, and it doesn't look as though it'd be much fun to be held in the dungeons there and roasted alive over a gridiron, does it? Particularly since you were apparently being basted with oil as though for an episode of MasterChef, but there we are.
Okay, everybody, that's the video. Thanks for coming along. I know it's been a long one, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye, everybody.